Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. I'm glad to know that you're all interested in AI. So today we are asking the big question, who does AI serve? If I can get my slides, that'd be great. In our day and age of everyone using AI, it's really important to ask questions of who creates the AI that we use. So who does AI serve? Well, most of the AI that we use today is made by a handful of big technology companies that are creating big models using a lot of energy and a lot of natural resources and selling these models back to us. And not only are these models trained with a lot of energy, but they're also trained on a lot of data. Our data that we give to these models through the internet, through books that we write, through content that we create as human beings that is used to train these models, and then we pay for using them ourselves. So it's important to know that this is not the only kind of AI. Actually, AI has been around for over 60 years now, but this is the AI that has become the most prevalent right now, the most popular, and the most used. But what does this AI represent? And who are the people who are actually profiting from it? What we really hear about most is not the costs of AI. It's not the negative impacts. It's not the communities impacted. It's really the positive. If you read about AI in the news or in media, you often hear about artificial general intelligence, the singularity, AI going to solve all of our problems. AI is going to magically create solutions that we didn't even know ourselves that we needed. But behind all of this is a narrative that is promoted by these companies to create an AI that is as generic as possible. Because when you and I use an AI, we usually want to do one specific thing. For example, writing an email or helping our kids with our homework. But these companies, they want to be able to do everything. They create these generic AI models, and this is why they're taking up so many resources, because they need to be big, they need to respond to any query, they need to be able to help any child anywhere in the world with their homework, write any email, and this is what uses more and more resources. But at the end of the day, they're not the only models that exist. There are lots of different alternatives out there, but most of the attention is sadly on these big models. So today, I will talk about AI's true costs in terms of environmental costs, in terms of societal costs, and in terms of economic costs. And hopefully together, we'll peel back the curtain, and we'll see that behind the promises of singularity, there are some very, very tangible impacts that we should be aware of as users of this technology. Let's start with the material, because I hear a lot people saying, well, before we used to have maps, we used to have books, we used to have all these different sources of content, websites, encyclopedias, what have you. Now we have a phone, right? A smartphone in the palm of our hand that does all of these things. So it's more sustainable, right? Because instead of having 10 different things, who even has maps anymore, right? Only pirates have maps. We only have phones in our hand, and so we might think that this is sustainable because it gives us access to all the information, but what we don't see is the cost of this dematerialization. And it's not only the environmental cost, but also the cost to our creativity and our mental capacity. So, for example, there was a recent study from MIT that showed as people use ChatGPT more and more, they actually offloaded their creative thinking and their critical thinking to these models, and they lost the ability to reflect over time because they were always querying ChatGPT. So they compared people over a couple of months, and they found that the more you use ChatGPT for these very deep, human-like tasks, the more you take a part of your brain and you offload it to the model. So it's definitely impacting the way we think, and of course it's impacting supply chains all over the world as we build more and more data centers, as we have critical minerals, we have human labor. There's a huge amount of human labor that goes into creating these models and this infrastructure, but we don't see any of this because it's all far away. The data centers are not the ones in the palm of our hand. What we have are the phones. And so it's important when we're thinking about how AI has tangible impacts to think about what is really needed to power our phones and to power our AI models that we don't necessarily see. There's also often promises of good with AI. Maybe you've heard some of them. Companies that are saying, for example, robots. Robots will help precision agriculture. They know exactly when to pick a head of lettuce. They can help small-scale farmers compete with bigger companies because they have robots doing all the work. And so this is supposed to be a net benefit, right? AI for good. But what happens to the communities of workers, especially non-documented workers, migrant workers that have been traditionally relying on this labor over time? the thing is with this kind of labor, it's often not officially in a census. We don't have official numbers, official statistics. So on the one hand, we have potential hundreds of millions of dollars of gain in money and time, and on the other hand, we have X number of workers that all of a sudden are out of a job. And of course, the emphasis is always put on the good and very, very rarely on the bad. This might seem far away, but us as well were impacted by automation. There have been studies that show, for example, that using navigation, AI-enabled navigation saves us time. We spend less time in traffic. We have more free time. Same thing with robots at home. They can help us save time doing household chores. So we have more free time, right? But what happens with that free time? How do we use it? Because other studies that have shown that once we have more free time that's due to technology, we actually buy more things online. We're expected to work more. We're expected to produce more because at the end of the day, we all have the same 24 hours. It just depends on how we use it. And maybe AI might save some of it, but it gets reallocated. And if at the end of the day we have to work more, then it's not really free time, right? Same thing with the promise that AI is going to make our societies safer. This is a tale as old as time, Minority Report, what have you. We have these promises that AI is going to detect people, detect faces, nowadays detect emotions, detect whether we're lying or not, and that this is going to somehow make society safer. But the cost of this is, of course, increased surveillance, both in our public lives and our private lives. And so far, there has yet to be any conclusive evidence that this actually makes our societies more safe. The evidence that does exist has shown that these algorithms, these models, are biased, that they tend to work less well on people of color, that they tend to actually reallocate police resources, for example, in districts that are already over-policed. And so what we have is this self-fulfilling prophecy that we're going to make AI is going to make our society safer, but by focusing on the places that already have a lot of, for example, policing. And so far, actually, if you look at success stories of AI, the biggest one has been selling us stuff. So many of the biggest platforms, not only Amazon, but many of the biggest e-commerce platforms use AI to do targeted advertising, to do product recommendations. And 30%, 35% of their annual revenue comes from selling us things that we weren't going to buy in the first place. Just, you go and you buy, a pair of shoes. Well, you need socks, you need other things. Customers like you have also bought. And so if you look at the numbers, most of the money is coming through applications like this, not through precision agriculture, but from selling us things online. And in the background, we have the energy demands and the environmental impacts of data centers, notably, that have been rising, set to rise exponentially in the next couple of years. So this is really getting out of hand. And the promise is that this is going to create artificial general intelligence or solve climate change. But what most of this is used for is selling us things on the internet. But as I said, there are alternatives, and I'm going to try to be a little positive today. So talk about 3 specific things that I think that we need in order to make AI more sustainable, more socially aware, and more equitable. On the one hand, I think we need a lot more democratization. So it's great that a lot of you are here today because we need more people who want to learn about AI, who want to participate in creating AI. We need more diverse people around the table. Because trust me, I've been at a lot of these tables of people who develop and deploy AI models, and there's a certain amount of homogeny. It's people with backgrounds in computer science. It's people who make a lot of money, who live in the global north. So we really definitely need more people around the table participating in these decisions. We need more policymakers. We need more teachers. We need more artists. We need more change makers in order to make AI representative of the values and the things that we care about, and not only a handful of people who develop AI models currently. We also need much more transparency, and I think we'll talk about it today during the panel. We need more information, because among the many frustrating things that I have to deal with on an everyday basis is people saying, well, what are the numbers? How many grams of CO2 does a Google query emit, or a ChatGPT query? How much energy are we using? And at the end of the day, we don't have these numbers. And so it's really, really hard as a scientist to be able to say this model is slightly less harmful, or this company is slightly more green than the other, and so we really need more numbers. A project that I've been co-leading for the past year is called AI Energy Score. What we did was we tested hundreds of open source AI models to measure the energy that they use, and we created these very easy to interpret scores so that people who aren't specialists in sustainability or actually in AI, it's like an appliance, right? You know how energy efficient an appliance is, or an apartment building, or a building here in France. Well, you can do the same thing with AI models. And it might seem like a small difference on a per query basis, but when you use this model millions of times a day, when it's used by thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, this really adds up over time. So the model that you use as the basis of your AI tool will really make a big ripple effect across time and across usage. And finally, I think we really need more accountability. James alluded to it before. Currently, if you think about it, it's pretty wild because big tech companies can make these tools, can sell these tools, can market these tools as the solution to mental health problems, as the solution to all sorts of societal issues, and then when they backfire, they don't take any responsibility for it. And so we've seen boycotts, we've seen protests of AI data centers, we've seen lawsuits. But we have yet to see meaningful change. And I think that at the end of the day, we don't just a small bit of text, please check the output of AI models because for factuality or whatever is not enough. We need to see more than that. We need to see laws. We need to see also citizen pushback. And this is really starting with data centers. It's something that I work most on, environmental impacts. We're starting to see people really pushing back, saying, we don't need a data center in our community. We don't need more resource usage, more water usage. And I think that once we achieve critical mass, it's going to be easier to make change. Because as users of AI, we're the ones who decide which AI tool to use and whether or not to use it in the first place. And so if enough people make this shift, then hopefully we'll be able to switch to an AI instead of having data centers that dominate the landscape, to have a true, more nature-inspired, more sustainable AI, and take back the power, pun intended, from the big tech companies and put it back into the hands of the users. Thank you so much.